Hello everyone! In this video, I will share with you some tips that you can use to improve the quality of your diagrams. Using diagrams in your essays is very important for at least two reasons. First, it demonstrates a skill. When you learn economics, you learn how to draw and use diagrams, and it would really be a shame if you write an essay without demonstrating that you have actually acquired that skill. Second reason, you've probably heard the sentence, "a picture is worth 1,000 words." And it is true that a diagram is a very efficient way to transmit information. When you just have a very quick look at a diagram, you can actually acquire a lot of information. So it's a very efficient way to summarize information. Okay, so I will share with you seven tips that you can use to improve the quality of your diagram. Let's go! So obviously the format of the diagram is extremely important. How to improve it? Well, first, choose the right scale. Many of my students draw diagrams that are very small, very small, and it's extremely difficult to see what's going on, what they want to show. So scale it up. It's okay to draw big diagrams. It's actually much easier to read them. Second, use a ruler to draw the axis or to draw any straight line. I know that in some exams, students are not allowed to take a ruler with them. You can just fold a piece of paper. This will make a very effective ruler. Also, make sure you leave some space between your diagram and your text. So for example, if you write a paragraph just before your diagram, then feel free to skip one or two lines before you actually start your diagram. And same thing after your diagram. Don't start writing the next paragraph right away. Skip one or two lines. It makes it more comfortable to read. And obviously, don't write anything on the sides of the diagram. If you have your diagram there, don't write anything on the sides. Actually, you should not even be able to, because if your diagram is big enough, you should not have any room left on the sides. Make sure you label everything properly. The axis, horizontal axis, vertical axis, any line or curve that you may draw, but also I believe it's important to label the important values on the horizontal and the vertical axis. So let's say you have a supply and demand equilibrium, very standard diagram. It's important to give a name to the equilibrium quantity, for example, Q star, and the equilibrium price, P star, for example. You can also label the equilibrium. You can give it a name, usually a letter, for example, point E. I'll talk about that later, but you will see that it's very important that you have everything labeled, everything has a name. So when you will write your comment, when you will comment your diagram, you will be able to refer to these points, to these labels that you have already defined, and this will make the comment of your diagram much easier to make. It's very important that you use arrows to show movement. Sometimes a diagram actually tells a story. You have an initial equilibrium and then something happens and you have a new equilibrium. So you move from an initial situation to a new situation. And if you do not use arrows to show this movement, it's not very easy for the reader to understand the sequence in which order things develop on your diagram. Usually you can use arrows to show shifts. If you have a shift in supply, in demand, or anything, you can use arrow to show that, so we understand clearly which one is the initial curve and which one is the final or new curve. And it's also important that you put arrows on the vertical axis or horizontal axis if you have an increase or a change in the quantity demanded or the equilibrium quantity, or a change in the equilibrium price, for example. Same thing, so we see very clearly, oh yeah, if you have an increase in supply, then you will have an increase in the quantity, in the equilibrium quantity, and a decrease in the equilibrium price. You should give a title to each of your diagrams. When you go to museums, you see that each artwork is given a title, and this is for a reason. It helps understand what there is to see. If you do not give a title to your diagram, it might be difficult for the reader to understand what you intend to show. Instead, if you give a title, you provide guidance, and you emphasize the coherence between your diagram and the point that you have previously stated and explained. Apart from giving a title to each of your diagrams, you should also give them a number. For example, figure 1, figure 2, diagram 1, diagram 2. The reason for that is because, let's say that later in your essay you want to refer to one of the particular diagrams that you may have drawn earlier. If you have several diagrams, it might not be easy to clearly identify which diagram you want to refer to. So if the diagram has a number, well, you can just say as we saw in figure 1 or as illustrated in figure 2, and then it's very easy and it clearly defines which diagrams you are talking about. The timing of the diagram is also a very important parameter. By timing, I actually mean the time at which you will use a diagram in your essay. As I explained in a different video, a diagram is something you use to illustrate a point that you have previously stated and explained. So, is it a good idea to start an essay with a diagram? Of course not. In that case, you would actually start by illustrating something that you have neither stated nor explained. So a diagram should always come after a statement and an explanation. I will show you an example in a minute. This is probably the most important point that I want to make today. You should write a short comment for each of your diagrams. The objective of that comment is to explain what there is to see in the diagram, to stress why this particular diagram is relevant to illustrate the point that you have previously stated and explained. If you do not write a comment, then the examiner will not be able to assess whether you really understand why this diagram is relevant in this particular part of your essay, and whether you actually understand how it works. So now let's summarize the way you should actually include a diagram in your essay. So the first stage is obviously to state and explain the point that you want to illustrate with that particular diagram, statement, explanation. Next, as I explained earlier, you should skip 1 or 2 lines just to make the essay more comfortable to read. Next, you can actually draw your diagrams by following the different guidelines that I gave earlier. Below your diagram, you will write the number and the title. Then you can skip 1 additional line before you actually start writing the comment of your diagram. And once you are done, you can start a new paragraph, so you skip an additional line before you move on to the next point. So in my opinion, this really is the ideal structure of one point, and this is a sound way to include a diagram in an essay. To conclude this video, let's have a look at an example. So here I want to make a point about price ceilings. So of course it might not be my first point, so there might be a previous point. Then what do? I start by stating the point that I want to make. This is a statement part. As soon as I have stated my point, I can provide the explanation of that particular point. Once it's done, I leave enough space between my paragraph and my diagram, again, just to make it more comfortable. Then I draw the diagram itself. So, okay, let's have a look at the format. Straight lines, of course, it's made on the computer. Is everything labeled? Yes, everything is labeled. All the important values on the horizontal axis and vertical axis are labeled. The equilibrium has a name. I have used arrows to show movement, the decrease in the equilibrium price and the decrease in the equilibrium quantity. Identify the shortage. Okay, so I think we really have everything in this diagram. I go down, there is a number, figure 1, and there is a title. Then I skip a line and I have this the comment of the diagram. So here, of course, it's a little long, right? It doesn't have to be that long. This one is very comprehensive. But the point is that you should explain what's going on in your diagram. And finally, once you are done with your comment, you can skip a line and you move on. You move on to the next point. So you see that the structure is very similar to what I explained just before. Right, I hope this video was helpful. Please let me know if there is any other content that you would like me to cover. Have a good day.